I just went through this 2-year period of healing. And at the end of it, I believe the goal that was established was to not be gay anymore and move forward in the marriage. But at the end of it, what I found was myself at the feet of a God who told me, I never tried to change you. Everyone else did.
All right, Nico, can you give a quick introduction on who you are and what it is that you do or are doing at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I am just your non-regular guy. I live in Colorado, state in the United States, and I'm a musician, actor, film producer, writer, do things of that nature. I'm not famous yet, so I also do things like social media marketing and whatnot, but I am a gay man who came out late in life and was raised in kind of the evangelical, and I would call it more like charismatic wings of the church. And so just kind of went through that process in life and becoming who I am. I have an 8-year-old daughter. I was married pretty young and had a daughter. And so that whole coming out process happened while I was married with a family. So that's me in a nutshell, I suppose.
Can we? Yeah. Okay. Well, this is what I want to get into. So, can we start with what kind of church you grew up in, and whereabouts in the States was that?
Yeah, so I was born in California, but lived most of my life here in the Colorado Springs area of Colorado. And Colorado Springs is very notable for two organizations kind of historically in the church. There's one called Focus on the Family, and there's one called New Life Church. It's also been the rise to more recently Andrew Womack Ministries and Charis Bible College. And so, but I went to New Life Church when I was younger, which is somewhat famous in some circles because the lead pastor was named Ted Haggard. And he was like really, really high up in evangelical world. He was like personal friends with George W. Bush when Bush was president, and just had a lot of influence, a lot of say in society and in matters of Christianity. And then a gay prostitute outed him on a radio interview and said that Ted Haggard had been hiring him and they had done meth together and he had sold him meth. And so this very charismatic, very powerful man kind of famously fell from like the peak of evangelical powers as kind of a gay meth user. And that was all happening while I was like a New Life Christian kid in high school. So dealing with the backlash of that, you know, both internally with stuff I had going on and thoughts that were ruminating within myself, and also externally with like, oh, I'm the Christian kid who goes to this church, and now all the non-Christian kids are like, have this very, very convenient ammo to shoot at me and to make fun of the religion and the church and all of that. And so, yeah, that's a bit of my backstory. I went to New Life for years, and then when I left that, I feel like I got into more like charismatic, extreme and spiritual beliefs, like, you know, heavy on miracles and less about like, I guess, scriptural and learning and more about just like the outward expression of God and like the power of God and what you could still do in the gifts of the Spirit and things like that.
Yeah, I sort of grew up in charismatic churches as well, but now I'm just coming out of it and realizing, like, even speaking in tongues, like, I don't think that's real. Like, were they speaking in tongues in your, like, the bada bada bada? Like, I don't.
Oh yes, oh yes. I've been known to speak in tongues. In fact, so speaking in tongues was kind of controversial at New Life. Not as controversial as it turned out as hiring gay prostitutes and doing meth, but controversial nonetheless. And there was like one guy who taught speaking in tongues, and my mom like attended his class, and he ended up like getting like, I don't know if he was kicked out or whatever, but they agreed to part, and he ended up starting his own church. And then we were going there because they would speak in tongues, and it just kind of evolves from there. And there's just this, so speaking in tongues, that's an interesting one that I'm also like, I don't know what I feel about it right now.
There's a whole movement, right? And evangelical movement where they're just like questioning all the stuff that we've been brought up with. And that's when we go back to Mike Shira, right?
Yes, for sure. So I found you listening to your Mike Maeshiro interview, I had like just recently been turned on to him by kind of a mentor in my life. And I'll name drop her. I don't mind that. Shalise. And she's kind of a charismatic leader, a bit in a different way. She's not like necessarily in ministry, but what she does is very ministry based. But she's helped me a lot in my life and was there for my coming out process in a lot of ways. And so she kind of recommended him to me, and I was out there doing an event with her, and I flew back from Chicago on the plane. And I just like was listening to a bunch of his podcasts and his story, and then I actually landed on his interview with you, and that's how you and I got connected. So thank you for having me on. But yeah, the ex-evangelical movement is a movement, and I don't know if I'm an ex-evangelical. I don't necessarily know what that means, but I'm certainly someone who was raised in belief systems that I no longer fully subscribe to.
So let's talk about that. Why don't we talk about your experience coming out gay in the church?
Okay. There's a lot to that, of course. So I, like most people who don't identify as fully heterosexual, had these feelings or thoughts from a relatively young age. And so it was kind of always there for me, this gay thing. But it wasn't gay to me. So that, and it sounds so ridiculous when I tell it in hindsight, and it's amazing how much you'll like lie to yourself just to like kind of fight something that you don't want to be. And I didn't want to be gay, so I didn't recognize that at all as that's what was happening. I had physical attraction to men. I had some physical experiences very young with guys, and I enjoyed them. And but it wasn't like oh, maybe I'm gay, or maybe I'm bisexual, or maybe I have, sexual attraction to men. It was more like, this is the thorn in my side. Right? Like, this is my cross to bear. This is the thing I have to battle. I literally never had the thought of like, maybe I'm gay until I was in my mid-20s. Despite all of that experience in my preteen years, my teenage years, like everything that was happening, I still like mentally, like the cognitive dissonance happening or something, I still like the only option was to be heterosexual, and this thing was just going to go away. It was going to go away on faith, or maybe just naturally. Maybe I just needed to meet the right woman, right? Like I had girlfriends, and then I started having sexual experiences with women, and I didn't enjoy those sexual experiences. And it was like concerning. Initially in my teen years, I would say I was kind of equally attracted to men and women, and equally drawn, but the more I experienced things, the more homosexual leaning I became. And so I kind of thought it was a matter of, right, I'd like blame the woman. I'd be like, have a sexual experience and be like, well, she was just gross or something, right? Like it's her fault. It's not got nothing to do with me. And so the denial's like very real, and the fear of being of being gay, even just culturally, like, yes, of course, in the church and religion and my family and all these things, but at the time, like culturally, it was not a good thing to be. There was no good example of like a gay man who you could look up to and want to be like. That did not exist at the time. And I'm not that old, but like I'm old enough to remember when you're in high school, you don't want to be the gay kid. And then it was like I grew up and the gay kid's winning prom king and people are happy about it. And I was like, well, that was not my experience. But anywho, long story short, very long story, very short. I felt like God told me I was gonna marry who was at my time my best friend. And her and I did music together, and we spent a lot of time together, and we talked on the phone, and we were best friends. We were extremely compatible people. And we really, it was an outside person who initially said like, oh, I had a vision of you getting married. And then what do, right? When you're in these circles, you test that spirit. You ask God yourself. You ask if that spirit, that voice you're hearing, do they confess Jesus is Lord? And right. And so like, all these things are confirming. I keep getting confirmed that I'm supposed to marry this person. And so we just did because we were faithful people. We were faithful to God, and our lives were about being faithful to God. So we got married, and 2 years after getting married,
You weren't sexually attracted to her or anything. She was just your best friend.
yeah, she was just my best friend. I did not have sexual attraction. Now, I will say that I loved her. And that's a thing I really had to battle with coming out of the marriage, was like, what is love? What is in love? Right? Like, and there's like these differences drawn and these lines drawn of like, I feel like I got accused a lot of not being in love with this person. And I would argue that I was in love with this person, but I don't know. Maybe someday I'll meet a man and get married and be like, oh, this is what in love is, right? Like maybe I wasn't able to experience what it's supposed to be like because I didn't have the full gambit of like, oh, I love this person, I'm compatible with this person, and this person intellectually stimulates me, and this person sexually stimulates me. I didn't experience that, so I don't know what it's like, and I still haven't experienced that combination of things. So maybe that combination is important. Maybe it's not, I wrestle with that a lot. But no, I wasn't sexually attracted, nor was I thinking anything romantic was building between us, really, until we felt like God told us to get married.
So you got married because you got this confirmation from God, and then what happened?
So then life happened, right? We found a place to live, and we settled in together, and we did music together, and we toured in a band, and did church together, and made friends together, and we did what any married couple does. Like, you build a life together. And so we built a life together. We had a daughter, and really when my daughter was born, they say like having kids changes you. And it does. But it's hard to say exactly how, and it's probably a little different for everyone. But for me, when we had my daughter, this thing started nagging at me. And it was like I was able to repress it for years. And I was happy for a lot of the marriage, and I was silently suffering for a lot of the marriage. And both of those things can be true, and both of them were true. And so when I had my daughter, I don't know what kicked in, but something kicked in that was like, you can't live your whole life in denial of what's happening within you and what's been happening. Like, you're denying this core part of your being. And so it really like riled up. And that's how I would describe the whole experience, like, of being closeted, was like there were months and months where it wouldn't really bother me for too long of a time, and I was able to just go on with life and be distracted with my work and my friendships or whatever. And then it would just like ramp up, and whatever would spark that, right? Maybe I have an attraction, maybe I have a little crush, maybe I like something, it just ramps up, and then it's all I can think about. And I just like think about how I have this secret, and oh my gosh, my life, and this has to get healed, and then I'm praying for it to go away, and then I'm like, it was just a strange experience of this kind of up and down internally of like, how relevant is this? Oh, is it not? Can I repress it? Can I be fine? Can I die with this secret? Or like it would come up and be like, oh my God, something's gonna happen. I'm gonna end up having this affair. I'm gonna be Ted Haggard, right? Which of course wasn't going to happen. I wasn't going to hire a male prostitute and do meth. That was never in consideration. But I tend to resort to humor when I'm talking about serious things. So, but that's what I would say. Like it was this ebb and flow. And then when my daughter was born, it just gained this momentum and started steamrolling into like, I have to tell somebody.
How did your marriage disintegrate, or just share whatever you're comfortable sharing? But
I first told a very close friend I'd had since high school. Now, people had kind of found out who didn't have a relationship with me, because I would get prayer for this or things like that at like Christian conferences or stuff like that, or it'd be very vague. So there was probably some people who knew but didn't know who I was. But the first person who I was in close relationship with, was one of my best friends, who's still one of my best friends to this day. And I told her, and this is, take this as it will, right? Maybe a bit of an indictment on the church, but she was my only non-Christian friend. And that's why I went to her. I felt safe going to her and not safe going to my Christian friends. And so she was the first one who found out, and she handled it really well and was really supportive. And I would just go like talk to her. It was almost like therapy. Like once a month, I'd just go to her house and just kind of vent whatever was happening in me, just to have an outlet, and it was so valuable and arguably life-saving. But eventually I got caught being there when I wasn't supposed to be there. And that was really how I ended up coming out to my wife, was she thought I might be having an affair. Um, it was like the opposite of that. Um, but I told her, and from there, the goal for the next couple years was to get healed. And in a lot of ways, right? Yes, healed of homosexuality, which was the unhealthy and toxic method, in my opinion now. But also like heal from some childhood traumas and heal. I just went through this 2-year period of healing. And at the end of it, I believe the goal that was established was to not be gay anymore and move forward in the marriage. But at the end of it, what I found was myself at the feet of a God who told me, I never tried to change you. Everyone else did. But I have not asked you to change. I have not told you to change. And that was my experience with God and what I heard from him on the matter. And I brought that into a couples therapy session with my now ex-wife and said, I'm no longer going to pursue changing this. And whatever that means, it means. I'm not saying it means anything, but what it means, which is I'm not going to try to change anymore. And yeah, that led to the disintegration of the marriage. And
I just want to try and understand your experience of being healed by homosexuality, as you put it. Like, what does that look like? Like, did you try to go to conversion therapy? Did you try pray away the gay? Like, what does that experience look like?
I tried a lot of different methods, nothing that would be considered conversion therapy, not in any like official sense. I certainly prayed with some people who, thought their prayer methods would heal me. Or I certainly prayed with people who thought, I did some like different kind of, how does it call them? They're modalities of healing, right? And so people will use them in many different contexts. And I think the thought of a lot of these facilitators who were helping me was homosexuality is sourced in something, right? So there's the thing you always hear, right? Like, were you molested as a child? Did you have a sexual experience as a child? And that made you gay. So I have some things from my childhood and a lot of things from my childhood that maybe people thought made me gay. And so it was about like, well, let's address those. Let's heal from those. Let's give those to God. Let's let God come into the situation and speak to it and speak truth. And I think that depending on who I was working with at the time, a lot of these people thought, oh, if we get him healed from these traumas, he will become straight, or he will, right? And then there's people who try to pray a demon out of you, right? Homosexuality it's a spiritual thing, and there's the spirit of homosexuality. And if we cast this spirit out of you, well, you won't be gay anymore. So I took many approaches to getting healed with many different people, and I did some very unhealthy things myself. And I'm not going to blame everyone else for that. Like I used to beat myself up physically. Like if I had homosexual thoughts, I would hurt myself. And the thought, right, of like, oh, tell a lie and pinch yourself, and then you'll associate telling a lie with pain, and then you won't tell a lie. Kind of the like big version of that. That didn't work. And I got to just a very, very unhealthy place where I was constantly drowned in my traumas from my life, and it's all I thought about, and it's just so much processing and forgiveness, and all I could think about was like everything bad that had happened in my life. All I could think about was that I was gay and I can't get out of it, and I'm going to ruin everyone's lives. I'm going to ruin my family's lives and my kids' life and my wife's life and my parents' life, and my friends are going to, like, I just got so weighed down in it that, like, at a certain point, healing was, it was doing the opposite. It was hurting me. It was creating new traumas. And then, I don't hear clearly from God, if that's what you want to call it, that often in my life. There's maybe, I could count on my two hands of like these instances where I felt like I heard him clearly speak something specific to me. And one of those was him telling me when I was jogging, I'm a runner, and he told me, while you jog, I want you to say out loud, I'm gay and that's okay. And I was like out loud? Yes. And it took me months, but eventually I'm jogging around like a crazy person on trails and stuff with people passing, like, I'm gay and that's okay. I'm gay and that's okay. And just kind of reinforcing this belief that, like, maybe this isn't something that's wrong with me. Like, maybe this is something that's wrong with the church or society, that the way they've treated this, not this itself. And then the word I alluded to earlier, which was God saying, I have never asked you to change. It's just people who have asked you. And so
when you say you hear God, when you say you hear God say these things to you, is it like audibly or in, like, what? Can you explain that to me? What does that mean to hear?
Sure. Yes. Well, that's a tough one, and I wrestle with it a lot. I think that people probably hear from God differently. And I maybe don't like the phrase hear from God right now or going forward, but I would say having experience and getting something communicated to you that is outside of yourself and bigger than whatever the physical realm is. They come kind of like thoughts. I would describe it kind of like a thought, but different. There's almost like a voice I have my thoughts in. And when I say I hear from God, I think it's coming like a thought, but in a different voice. And those thoughts don't feel like my own. They don't feel like my ideas. They don't feel like something I would come up with or say to myself. So that's how I would describe hearing from God. Have you ever felt like you've heard from God?
Like nearly every day. Yeah, but when I hear from God, it's more of yeah, I get it, it's like I would say it's in the spirit, and then what does that mean? It's like your mind becomes like an epiphany in a way, like, that makes sense. And I would, how do I know that's God and not my own thoughts? I think through prayer. Like, I'll be praying about it or thinking about it or reading the Bible or reading a devotional, and then just being like, what the heck is going on here? Like, what is your way? Show me your way in this, God. And was it Moses that prayed like that in the Bible? Like, show me your way, or one of the dudes, right? And then I can envision a better way. And the reason I know it's God and not myself is it's wholesome. It's exuding those fruits of the spirit that it talks about in the Bible, right? Like generous, loving, kind, like empathetic, caring, like goodness. Like, I'm just like, like, I don't know how else to explain where that comes from, but I'd say that's what I would depict the voice of God to be.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And I would say I almost have two different hearing from Gods happening. So I have the epiphany thing, and that has happened countless times in my life. But then there's almost like this voice in my head that's even different from that's just happened a few times, that I feel like this is God saying something to me directly that is like verbatim. And then there's like this hearing from God that's almost like a feeling, or like you said, epiphany, but it's not like a verbatim, I could quote it, right? Like when I heard God say, like, I want you to say I'm gay and that's okay. It was those words. It wasn't like this feeling of like, oh, maybe this isn't a problem with me. So I've had both happen. I've had the other one happen way more, and then the like verbatim thing, like, oh, I feel like God is saying these specific words, has only happened in a few instances in my life.
Yeah, I've never had that experience with because this is what Mike said in the interview. He's like, yeah, God said it's okay to be gay or something. I've never heard anything like that from God. I think I've just heard him say, "You like come to me, you're mine. Like don't worry about that." Because quite often other Christians are like, "Yeah, it fucking, you need to sort of turn away from that homosexual lifestyle." But I think when I get close to Jesus, I can just see all this other stuff in me, like selfish motives, doing things to benefit myself, wanting to extract and take from people, and that I guess I would say is the sin nature, right? Which God is trying to sanctify us. I mean, this is getting very Christian-y, but he sanctifies us from that nature, which is my understanding. But I've never heard God say, "Yeah, I affirm you for being gay," but I've never heard him say that's wrong either. That's people, right? And that people, and especially the church
Yeah.
today, they're just fixated on it. Like it's like the only thing, the only sin. It's being gay or having sex or whatever. Um,
Yeah.
so have you come to fully accept yourself now as a gay man?
Yes. As a gay man, being an important little asterisk, fully accept myself is a bigger question. But I think that I'll try to wrap up my story, right? So I basically said I'm not going to try to change. We split up, we get divorced. I worked in a Christian nonprofit organization for 7 years. I was a leader there. They had like a contract you sign, like a morality clause, and one of the things in that morality clause was to not be a homosexual, right? So I couldn't come out at work. I couldn't come out to anyone I worked with, which was many of my best friends, some of my family. So for about a year after I was divorced, I still didn't come out. And I was like divorced and no one knew why. And it was like this, this little mystery of like, what the heck happened there? Because we were, as I mentioned before, very compatible people and very good friends. And some married people you meet and you're like, I don't feel like they really like each other, but for whatever reason, they love each other. That wasn't us. Everyone thought we were like great together and we really got along and we had a lot of similar interests and we played off each other well and humorous. And so people were very stunned when we split up, and people had no inkling that anything was wrong. And I went a full like year and a half really to like publicly come out. Within probably 8 months, I told most of like my close friends and family and things like that. But I would say I've pretty radically accepted myself or this part of me now. And I certainly have some bitterness about like, I'm sure like a lot of people come out late in life. Like I came out publicly right before my 30th birthday or after. Sorry, it was after. I was 30 when I came out publicly. And so there's this, of course, this part of me that's like, what could have my life been? Like it feels like I built a whole life, a family, a friend group, this whole life that had to fall apart and collapse just for me to be me at like the fundamental level. What could have I built that could have lasted if I could have come out when I was 14 or at least experimented with it and been okay with like, hey, I'm attracted to guys. Maybe I'll date a guy or maybe I'll dabble in this and then I'll learn about myself, and I would have landed where I land, I think, which is like, I'm only interested in men sexually. Like I didn't know that when I was 12, but through life experience, I learned it, but I learned it through a ton of resistance. And it would have been nice if I could have had the freedom to just explore it earlier in life and settle there and start to build a life that I could have maintained instead of building a life that I had to rip apart just to be myself. And so I have accepted myself. I am working on accepting my past and my life to this point because there's nothing I can do to change it. And I love a lot of things about it, right? Like I say I built a life I had to completely tear apart. That's not true. And that's maybe a dishonoring statement and I take it back. I have my daughter and I would have not had her otherwise, right? So that's a beautiful, amazing thing. And really probably the most important thing in my life that came from that life. And so that's great. I can't regret the life because I can't regret my daughter, and I don't regret my daughter, and I love being a father and I love her. And it's just tough. It's the what ifs that anyone asks in life, I think, with big things. But I certainly have fully accepted myself now. I think I'm slowly gaining a little less tolerance for people around me to still process it, or to not be affirming of me because I was 30 years old. Everyone I met in my life was from church or work, or like they were Christian people. They were conservative people. They weren't necessarily on fire about the gays. So there's still a lot of people in my life who are not affirming, there's many people in my life who won't acknowledge this, haven't acknowledged this in years, haven't said a word as if it's something that didn't happen. And I think I've had tolerance for that because I'm kind of like, well, hell, it took me a long time to accept myself, right? I'm going to give you some time. And I think that's fair. And I think that people should do that, right? I take 10 years to come out to myself. Well, I can't expect my parents to accept it in a week, but can I expect them to then dive in and process it and try to at least engage in the conversation or the possibilities or different thought processes? Or yes, I have that expectation. And if you're not going to do that, if you're just going to stay where you were and not reevaluate it all based on the fact that one of the most important people in your life has come out and had this experience, and not try to learn from that experience or engage in that experience, I think I'm going to have less tolerance for that going forward in my life. So I kind of consider myself very much an advocate for these things, and an advocate for young people to be able to build a world where you can comfortably explore things like sexuality, things like, not to get too far into this buzzword, but even like gender identity. And I'm sure we could go on and on there too, because they are different things, and I'll very clearly state that. But I just don't see the harm, and why people are so afraid of people kind of exploring in their youth of who they are so that they can settle on it and not like have to go through what I went through.
I suppose I want to move on now to your faith. Where are you at with your faith or Christianity, and how are you reconciling that to your sexuality? Would you say you're still a gay Christian?
Yeah, I haven't been asked that question recently. I would say I'm a gay Christian. I am battling with a lot of my beliefs right now, and you are somewhat responsible. So it's a little so apropos that we're discussing this here. I I think that it was pretty easy for me at a certain point to get to a comfortable, like, yeah, I can be gay and a Christian, because I think my core beliefs about what Jesus did on the cross, like our behaviors and our actions, to me have really nothing to do with if we can have relationship with Jesus or not. If we can be saved. Like I'm a relatively progressive Christian and have been for a while, in like I don't really believe in an eternal hell. I think that like Jesus paid for everyone's sins, and like the sin of unbelief or the sin of an incorrect belief is still a sin that was paid for. It makes no sense to me that like we seem to have this like massive group of Christians who agree like, oh yeah, if you steal something from Walmart, Jesus covered you and you're still saved. But if you believe that Jesus was the Son of God and not God in the flesh, well, he can't cover that one. He can't cover a wrong thought. He can cover a wrong action, and the cross can pay for that, but it can't pay for you being taught wrong and believing it. Like, how rigid of a God is that? Like, he's going to get caught up in pomp and circumstance. We can't expect everyone to believe perfectly about God. So if God did what we understand he did on the cross, then it covers false beliefs, because false beliefs are just another kind of sin.
I mean, this is where I'm at with Christianity. Like, why is it so difficult? Like, why all this misinterpretation? I feel like a lot of people have misinterpreted the gospel, and who Jesus is, and they're going to church on Sunday, but they're not exuding the qualities of Jesus at all. And I'm just like, I mean, it's probably us gay Christians, I feel like we have probably more of a capacity to emulate the qualities of Jesus, to be more compassionate and kind and loving because we've experienced all this shame. I mean, I even think there's a biblical case for, dare I say this, but gay people being closer to Jesus and people that are just going to church on Sundays is further away. Like, I mean, C.S. Lewis talks about this, like the old self-righteous prig who goes to church on a Sunday is often closer to hell than a prostitute. Although he did say it's better to be neither, but
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, you got to add that one in there, right? But it's like, I don't know why there's all this misinterpretation, or why the Bible's so confusing, all these different doctrines. But I think closeness with Jesus is literally just having his spirit dwelling within you and sanctifying you, convicting you of sin. You repenting of it doesn't mean, oh my God, I'm sorry, God, I'm such a sinner. Repenting of it means to be shown it and then change your mind. Like, his nature in you changes your mind and just changes your being. And I don't see this happening with a lot of people that just attend church. I can see this happening. I mean, I'm evidence of it. I'm gay. I still have sex with women, but I'm experiencing God. So what the fuck?
Yeah, exactly. Well, there's kind of two minds about it, right? Like, I think in one sense, no one's going to be perfect, and we kind of all agree on that a little bit. Like, yeah, we're all going to have sin in our life, or we're all going to do things wrong. Like, there is no perfect example of humanity outside of Jesus himself. And so we can't expect to act perfectly. But then the other side is, it's kind of like what you were saying about the fruit of the Spirit, right? So when we're talking about scripture, I would say right now I'm very conceptual with scripture. So, like, what's the concept? What's the overarching point it's making? Not down to the details, because I think why we disagree on so much is, right, we've got all these translations and all these interpretations, and I can read the exact same verse and get something differently out of it than someone else. So to me, it's not the best source of, like, let's talk in detail what Jesus meant by this. I don't even know that he said that verbatim. Like, I can't. So but to me, it's more like concepts. So one of the concepts is the fruit of the Spirit, right? The fruit of the Spirit of how the church has treated homosexuality is bad. It's clearly bad fruit. No one would describe it as kindness and goodness and gentleness and tolerance, right? Like, the fruits of the Spirit aren't shown there, nor are the fruits in the Spirit shown in, like, people trying to live in a false identity. So I think that for me, like, with my homosexuality, yeah, I spent my whole life thinking like this was a sin or a burden. There was times in my life where my theology made me think it would cause me to go to hell, or it could cause me not to know God. Then there was times where I was like, oh, I know God wouldn't send me to hell just for this, but right, I can't live the lifestyle, whatever that is, because, all gays live the exact same lifestyle. I wrestled with it so much, and then eventually my experience with God himself was like, I don't have a problem with it, to paraphrase, everyone else just does. People just do. So it's easy to reconcile my faith with it, because my personal experience with the God I have faith in was fine with me. So it's not hard to reconcile. I'd say my relationship with the church is what's hard to reconcile, and I don't know how to heal it. And it just really affects a lot of my relationships and a lot of how I engage in relationships and meet new people going forward. I attended actually a church, an affirming church, for the first time last week. So it was a week ago today. And it's the first time I've, like, gone to church in years. I see no need for it in my life, in this time of life, because I don't see the fruit of the spirit. Not for me, not for now. And that doesn't mean it's not for anyone. And I think God has a way of placing people where they will thrive. If you need rigid rules to chase after God and to stay on a good path, then maybe God will land you in Catholicism, right? I don't think I need Catholicism. I think I just need like good community. I need good people to speak with. I need conversation. Like even this really engages me and kind of lights a fire spiritually in me. And it makes me like internally question. It makes me want to talk to God or go to God or even like reevaluate myself, my behaviors, my beliefs. I think all of that stuff is good. I think testing your faith is good. And I think God will often land you wherever you need to be so that you'll do those things.
Totally. And you just, yeah, you've made me think of like, yeah, healing. Like what gay Christians need is healing, but yeah, it just really does come from Jesus, right? Not the church. It's the church that rejects us. It's not Jesus. And I feel like Jesus can fill us with so much love that it could actually make us go back to the people that reject us and love them, right? Love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. You can only really meet that standard with his Holy Spirit in you. That's where I'm at. So, I mean, it sounds like you're on a journey, a good one. I suppose, where do you see yourself going now with your faith? And what was your experience like at the Affirming Church?
The Affirming Church was good and super surprising. It was like all really old people, which is not the direction I expected it to go. And it was like very traditional. It's like one of those old giant church buildings, beautiful downtown. And most of the demographic was like 70 plus. And they were singing hymns. And I was just like, this is not what I've been told the affirming progressive church is, you know? And it was great. I mean, I think those people just wanted to gather and worship God, and they wanted to welcome anyone to come and gather and worship God. And that's really what they should be facilitating as the church. Like, yeah, I think there's an element of teaching, right? But I think even like the church scripturally wouldn't be one person speaks and everyone listens and takes on their beliefs. And that's kind of what the church in our modern times have become. But I think the church was meant to have discussions and different points of views, and everyone's getting challenged, not just the congregation getting challenged from the one speaker and teacher. So I think it was a beautiful thing. Multiple people spoke at it. It was a really good church experience. It's not something I want to do weekly because I don't know, it was a little boring. But it renewed my faith a little bit in what church could be, because I think what they're doing is very beautiful. I think what they're doing is very selfless. Like, they are struggling financially purely because they made the decision to be affirming. They lost a lot of congregation and a lot of money coming in because of that, but they did it anyway because it was the right thing to do. And so I have a ton of respect for that. As far as where I go from here, I think I'm in a like place of a little bit of inner turmoil. Number one, I've kind of had this core value since I came out publicly, which is to do my best to honor, respect, and love people, especially those who don't do that for me, who don't honor, respect, and love me back. Because loving people is more about who you are and not who they are. And so that's like a core value I take with me, and I try to kind of preach. I've been known to say this on stage when I'm performing with my band. So I don't want to lose that. But like I said, I think I'm having a little less tolerance, particularly if you're already in relationship with me. If you're going to be unaffirming and there's not really going to be any reason for that or any conversation with it, or if you're not going to kind of just acknowledge my being, I think maybe I'm going to get more confrontational. But ultimately, my biggest struggle is in Scripture and is in the Bible. And the reason I alluded to you earlier was because I was on kind of a Mike Miyashiro rabbit hole, and you had him on, and he put something on the Bible the way that I think I already felt inside for years, but it had never been phrased like he phrased it. And it made me have to reevaluate a lot of what I believe. So I, for probably a decade now, or close to, have been on the like, us calling the Bible the infallible word of God is an absolute ridiculous phrasing of what the Bible is. And I think that the Bible has become an idol in the church. In fact, I would argue quite rigidly that the Bible is the number one idol of Christians. It is put at the level or above God himself. And that's what the Bible's become, in my view. Yet the Bible is a collection of writings from people hearing from God, just like you and me discussed earlier, right? Like, oh, it's kind of this voice, or it's this feeling, or it's this epiphany, and then I hash it out in prayer, or I kind of figure it out. But by no means would I expect, like, Melody, if you heard something from God the way you described earlier, and then a week later you came to me and you were like, oh, this is what I heard from God, this is what he's saying, I would believe, for the most part, what you're saying. I would certainly believe you heard from God, and I would believe your intentions are good. But I would never take those words that came out of your mouth and call them God's himself. I would never say, these are verbatim God's words, and I'm going to take that with me in my life. Yet that's what we do with the scriptures. We act like these people were some kind of like special kind of medium for God to speak extremely clearly through without mistake, without bias, without their own lens or experience coming into play, and then just say, oh, this is God, as if God wrote it, down with his giant pen in the sky. I think that's ridiculous. And I can no longer go forward acting like scripture is the verbatim word of God. I think at best, it's spiritually inspired writings of admittedly, some brilliant people probably, but they're putting their thoughts on that page, and we're calling it God. And I think I'm done doing that. So I've kind of been going through this process lately of like, well, what of my beliefs are sourced purely in scripture? And I now have to question those beliefs, because I don't think scripture is as reliable as it's been made out to be. I think it's essentially a historical book that, like, if I were to ask a 50-year-old to tell me a story from when he was 10, he'd give me the gist. But the details, the words that were said, the people there, the location, would all be very hazy and unreliable. And he'd be remembering it differently than what actually happened when he was 10. So I think the Bible gives us a glimpse of history, a glimpse of a story that actually happened. But the details, like, it's almost not even worth debating what certain verses mean to me anymore, because it's like, I don't even know that this is what was written or what was meant at all, and neither do you. So why are we going to argue about it? So I'd say that that's just like hit me, like really hit me in the past few weeks. And a lot of it came from watching that interview that you did.
Well, that's kind of what Mike talks about, right? I think this is a really good place to end. I'm keen to wrap this up, Nico. But if people want to reach out to you or find you, where should they go?
Yeah, I'm pretty active on my Instagram, which is at I am Yanez, which is YANYEZ. I post a lot on there about like films I'm doing or my band. I just released a single, so go check it out on Spotify or Apple or whatever. So my band is Yanez, YANYEZ. I'm on all the socials, not Twitter, X. Probably going to delete that one. Don't message me on X. I'm on Instagram or Facebook, and my contacts on my website, which is yanezmusic.com. And yeah, if people want to engage with me or ask me questions or follow up or discuss these things, I am totally open. I love discussing these kinds of things. Thank you so much for just kind of giving me an outlet to process and vent, which is, I think, could be a good description of what I just did on your podcast. Um, so thanks so much for that, Melody.
Well, I'll have to see where you're at in like a year. Yeah. Yep. All right.